So we are starting in the book of Esther. So if you want to turn there, we will get there in a little bit. So I'm going to start with a story about a frog. And this frog was a very, very lonely frog. He was living all by himself and extremely lonely. So one day the frog decided, I'm going to go visit a prophet and see if he can tell me anything about my life. So the frog, I guess he hopped to see the prophet. And the prophet said, I have good news. There's going to be a day pretty soon when you're going to meet a young lady that's going to want to know everything about you. So the frog started getting excited because he's been very lonely his whole life, and there's a day coming soon, he's been told, and there's going to be this young lady that will want to know everything about him. So the frog asked the prophet, well, can you tell me when this is going to happen? And the prophet said, next semester in biology class. Did somebody just say I'm laughing? You just haven't got it yet, Daryl. You'll laugh later. It was really quite funny. Not a lot of point to that other than it does seem like there's times in life when maybe things seem to be finally getting to a point where they're going to go really, really well, and everything changes, the bottom falls off, things go south really fast. I think we've all experienced enough of life that there's just all these ups and downs in life. And I think if we dared to admit it, we may not want to say it in public, but there's probably times when we wonder, is God even involved anymore? Or where is God? Just doesn't look like God knows what he's doing right now in my circumstance. And the book of Esther is a lot like that. And this book is actually, I don't know as I'd ever really realized it or thought about it until the last few weeks studying this, looking at it. It's the only, out of the 66 books, it's the only book in the Bible that does not mention the name of God. Like the name of God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. And really even Israel and Judah, none of that is mentioned in this book. And I kind of asked the question, why would God include in his word, a word that's meant for teaching and correction and reproof and sanctification, why would he include a book in there that doesn't even mention his name? And I believe at least one of the reasons is that there are many times in our lives when it seems that God is nowhere to be found, but the fact is he is very much at work and active. That there are times in life when we say, where's God? That we go through circumstances that just don't seem to make any sense, and we don't see God active, we don't see him doing things, and we just say, where is God in this? Or we get in these situations and think like, if I were God, I would not have allowed any of this to happen to me. Like, where is God in this? What is he doing? Why can I not see him? Why can I not identify him? Why do I not hear his voice? Where's God? And we look and we can't seem to locate him. Almost seems like he's invisible. I want to do a little bit of talking some theology or doctrine this morning for a second, but there is a biblical word for this called providence. God's unseen hand at work. And I want us, as we go through Esther over the next couple months, to keep that word in our mind, this word of providence, God's unseen hand at work. Because I think this will give us great comfort and help us learn how to trust God, that even in those times when we're like, where is God? Or this doesn't seem to make any sense. How could this be happening? How could these things be happening in my life, that when we understand the providence of God, it will help us. That he providentially rules and overrules when circumstances seem to be taking shape that would result in the destruction of his people, the Jews. We're going to see that in the book of Esther. And I really feel like, again, this book that does not mention the name of God, but as we're going to see through this lens of providence, he is active on every page and every word of this book. That this book is here to teach us something. Otherwise, it actually would make a really good story. It is a very just interesting and probably fun story. It'd make a great movie. It's almost written like we would probably write a movie or a book, the way it's just unfolded there. But it's there, I believe, one of the big reasons is to teach you and I something about God that I think we all face. That he is present and he is at work in our lives and in history, even in those times when we say, "Where's God?" or "This doesn't make sense." And this thing is driving me crazy. So I'll just try to distract you once for a second while I get that on there. There we go. So underneath this idea of providence, I think we got to look at a couple other things first to help us understand providence. And one of those things is the sovereignty of God. That we got to understand the sovereignty of God. And this is one of his, in a sense, chief theological attributes, his characteristics. And that word sovereign means God has absolute authority and complete control. That God does as he pleases, only as he pleases, and always as he pleases. God has complete control. Just a couple verses. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. Psalm 115:3. Or Isaiah 46, 9 and 10. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose. That is sovereignty. He is in charge of all things because he created all things. He always does as he pleases, and only as he pleases. Now here's where it maybe starts making our brains ache a little bit. But I believe that God in his sovereignty has given humanity the ability to make choices. That he created us with a capacity to obey or disobey, to choose or reject him. And the word of God is repeatedly using words like if you believe, if you love, if you obey, choose or trust, whoever believes, if you confess, seek and ask. And these words all indicate that humanity has the free ability to make decisions and choices. I do not believe that God pre-programmed us as robots to just act. So hopefully now you're feeling some tension. That God is sovereign. He does only as he pleases. And yet also he has given in his sovereignty, he has allowed us to have free will. To make decisions, to choose him, to reject him. We can sin, we can disobey, or we can obey. We can seek after him, or we can not seek after him. So God is supremely sovereign, and we are responsible for our response to him, and responsible for our behavior. And I like what the Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon said when someone asked him how he reconciled God's sovereignty and human responsibility. He said, I wouldn't try. I never reconcile friends. And that's why I'm not going to try a lot this morning either. But I think if we want to understand providence, and if we want to understand this book of Esther, and if we want to understand our lives, I think we have to understand that God's sovereignty and him sovereignly saying, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do as you wish. We don't have to reconcile that. We don't have to, because there's part of that I think no matter how smart you are, it doesn't quite fit in our brain. And that doesn't take a whole lot for me, but so God is sovereign. He grants humanity freedom. And this is going to make at least my brain ache a little bit more, but he will not allow that freedom to stop his sovereignty. That God sews or weaves that freedom together to fulfill his sovereign purpose. That God has a sovereign purpose, and he's also given us the ability to make choices and decisions. And I believe his providence is what takes all of that and sews it together to accomplish his purposes. That God's providence is the miraculous and often mysterious way he intersects and interconnects people and events to bring about his sovereign will and purpose. And providence is often mysterious. We may not see God's hand at work, but he's indeed working and controlling action by either causing or allowing things to happen. And Esther's story reveals that God will providentially either cause or allow things to happen that either are or seem to be in contradiction to what he wants in order to achieve his ultimate sovereign plan. And I'll give you an illustration, and this is, I invite you to chew on it, and you'll have a small group maybe to chew on it. Probably be a little bit careful. But one illustration, I'll give you two actually. One is the life of Joseph. He's been sold into slavery by his brothers, mistreated in Egypt. He rises to the right hand of Pharaoh, reconciles with his family, and he tells his brothers, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many should be kept alive as they are today. So God had a purpose to keep many alive. It says his brothers meant it for evil. That means they sinned. They were doing things that God, in a sense, didn't want. God doesn't want us to sin. But yet, somehow, he's sewing all of that together to get Joseph to Egypt so that many people should be kept alive. And there's a piece of that we just have to trust. Because my mind goes to, why not just not have the famine happen to begin with? You're God. And I think some of it is because there's millions of other things that are going on that we don't have a clue about, so that God is sewing all of this history together to accomplish his purposes. Here's one I was thinking about this week. Trevor and Skyla got married yesterday, 2 days ago, Friday. But one of the things that really blessed me is all four sets of grandparents and both sets of parents were there at the wedding. And they're all following Jesus. That in itself, but if you think about God's providence to bring all of that together, it's crazy. He used things that he did not want to accomplish that. Divorce. To give me a father. I mean, yeah, you guys get it. Don't underestimate or don't forget about God's providence when it seems like, where's God? What's going on? He will accomplish his purposes. I believe when we start to understand or continue to understand God's sovereignty in his providential ways of achieving his will, you start to become more aware of his involvement, even when he seems absent. You can start to trust and be like, okay, where's God? But okay, he's sovereign. He's acting. He's doing things. He's orchestrating. He's behind the scenes like the puppet master pulling the strings. He's going to accomplish his purposes. Think about the crucifixion. The greatest sin that was ever committed was killing Jesus Christ. But God sowed all of that. He even ordained all of that. And some of that we just got to be like, okay, God, I'm just going to trust you in this. That you are sovereign. You've also, because you're a God of love, have given us the ability to choose or reject. But in that, you're still going to accomplish your sovereign purposes. This book of Esther, I think, is written for that purpose, that we can see the way God, his providence, just rules and accomplishes purposes, fulfills his promises. And I hope it just encourages us, even when it feels like the bottom is falling off of life and we don't know what's going on, that we can be like, okay, I'm going to trust God here. There's a map. I wanted to get this up there. I don't know if it'll make it up. But just a couple things that, for the book of Esther, it's a chiastic, I don't even know if I'm saying that right, chiastic, chiastic structure, and I did not figure this out on my own. But it's this idea that we'll see that it all builds to this climax at the end of chapter 5, but it's kind of almost this idea of a mirror. There we go. The opening and background in the king's first decree, the clash between Haman and Mordecai, and then we get the climax on the night the king could not sleep. And then it's almost mirrored in reverse where God's starting to accomplish his purposes. And it's just kind of as I've been digging into this more, it's a pretty amazing story, and I hope it, again, teaches us about the providence of God, that it builds our confidence in who God is and what he's doing, even when we don't see him and when it seems like he's not around. All right, let's keep going. So Esther, I'm just going to walk down through, because this is a story. So there's a sense where I don't want to get in the way with it. I'll add a little bit here and there. But especially the first couple chapters are introducing, they're setting the stage, but all of this is meant to get our minds going, what is God up to? How is he going to accomplish this? What's going on? Where is God? So verse 1 says, now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 120 provinces. So that was the first map there. It's a big province. It's a big empire. I don't know how well you can see it, but it's up there. This guy had a lot of power. He had a lot of clout. He was a big deal. It looks like at least 3 continents that he's part of. So this Persian Empire is humongous. And again, I think the author, I don't believe we even know who wrote this. Some of it he's setting is up. Like this Ahasuerus or Xerxes was his name as well, was powerful. He was a big deal. He had a lot of control. He had a lot of clout. And I think the author wants us to know these things. But also to understand this story, I think it helps to understand 2 other books of the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah. Because Esther is happening during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So here's a little bit of a timeline, and apparently I'm getting old too and can't read that very well. But you can see under Persian Empire, there's a time when Ezra, in chapters 1, 2 through 6, went back. He's rebuilt the temple. So God had sent the Israelites into captivity because they had been sinning. So Babylonians came, carried them off, King Nebuchadnezzar, I believed. So they're there 70 years. The 70 years is up. God has sets it up. So Cyrus, I believe, was the king of Persia at the time, gives permission for Ezra to go back and rebuild the temple. So some of that is starting to happen. But all the Jews have not went back. Some did. So Esther is kind of in the middle of chapters, or between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of Ezra. Nehemiah in a little bit is going to be given permission to go back and build the walls and the temple. So Esther is happening during this time when the Jews are able to go back to Israel and rebuild the city. And Esther is a group of Jews that did not go back yet. So they're still living outside of Jerusalem. Here's another picture of that just shows where Esther is, and some of the times there it's a little easier to read there. I think it's important that we get that time frame too to understand what God is up to. He's promised that he would bring the Jews back to Jerusalem, to Israel, and to see the way he providentially is unfolding history and using even evil, sinful men and women to accomplish his purposes. So between chapter 6 and 7 of Ezra, you can drop into this book of Esther. It's all happening together. So I just even encourage you this week or the next couple weeks, read Ezra and Nehemiah as well as Esther to get a feel of what's happening, what's going on during this time. So verse 2, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So do you see what's happening here? Verse 3 says a banquet. There's a party, and this is a big party. This is a 6-month-long party. Like, this guy's getting after it. 6 months, and he's not in college. Like, this guy's partying, and he's just displaying, again, I believe the author wants us to see the greatness, the authority that this guy has, the riches, the power. Like, he's the man, probably the most powerful man in the world at this time. And he's got unlimited resources. And he's just throwing a party for 6 months. And I'm guessing that he's inviting, different leaders in and out and all of this, so we don't know exactly what this 6-month party looked like. Verse 5, and when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods, marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of, I don't know what this is, porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Again, this description of the length and the wealth of this banquet is intended just to get in our minds this picture of unlimited resources. Again, he's partying, and he's not partying with red Solo cups. And there's no lack of juice at the party, right? I'm glad more of you didn't understand that. At least you're smart enough not to acknowledge it, right? Verse 8, and drinking was according to this edict, there is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. So again, you could drink all you wanted to drink. There was no compulsion. You could drink a little, you could drink a lot. You didn't have to get wasted right off the bat. You could drag it out as long as you want. But endless supply. And that he gave this edict, like there's no compulsion. Do as each man desired. Again, I think the reader is almost like satire, like mocking this government, mocking this king. Like, look at this picture. Like, he's just putting himself on display, and then he's getting wrecked for 6 months straight, and he's going to start making laws. Like, he's giving out orders that each guy could drink as much as he wanted to, do whatever he wanted to. Just the foolishness that's happening here. Verse 9, Queen Vashti, so that would be his wife, also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So the men are partying in one place. The queen is at least having a feast, apparently for 6 months, maybe 2, and just in the palace. But they're in separate locations. And now verse 5, I'm going to jump back to that. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So it seems almost like this is the grand conclusion of this party. Like now he's just opening up. The last 7 days we're going to go all in, and anybody can come to this party. It kind of reminded maybe like fireworks when you go and they're shooting them off at kind of a steady rate, and then it gets to the grand climax, and all of a sudden they let loose and send all these fireworks out for the grand finale. And I think he's ending this party, the 6 months, with this week of just going all in with it. And in verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, that means he was drunk, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zetar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. Like if this is the first time you're hearing this story, you're kind of like, okay, this is starting to get good. We just partied for 6 months, and then we're having this big conclusion, and now he's calling for his wife. Like something's about to go down here. Like this is, again, keep it under that context of providence. Like what is going on? Like where is God? Like what is he doing? So he commanded his leaders to bring his wife, Queen Vashti, before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people. In other words, the king wants his wife to come and strut her stuff because he wants to show off. He wants his drunk buddies to see how gorgeous his wife is. Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So the king's ticked off now. I call my wife. She refuses to come. Not only am I your husband, I'm the king. Like if I tell you to come, you come. That's just how it goes. And she refuses. She says, no, I'm not coming. So he's mad. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, aren't you like, it's like, okay, like, I want to know what happens. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marcina, in Mamukin. I have no idea what them are. The 7 princes of Persia and Media who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. So king's mad. He calls the wise men there that he's going to get all of his advice from, who have probably been partying for 6 months. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? In other words, what are we going to do with this woman? Like she's just disrespected me in public, in front of my boys. Like, so what are we going to do? Any of you men ever get mad at your wife? She disrespects you in public. Good idea not to raise your hand there. What are we going to do about this? Verse 16, then Mamukin said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. And I'm thinking, like, what did she just do that's going to mess this whole kingdom up? Like, this is seems like I don't know, maybe not minor, but a relatively minor dispute that's happened within the house. And all of a sudden he's taking it and like This is going to jack the whole kingdom up. It's kind of like if you're arguing with your wife which way the toilet paper should go, like you come and you put it on, like, it's like it seems like he's going overboard here. So why do they think this? Why do they think that what by Queen Vashti rejecting the king's command, it's going to have this effect? Verse 17, for the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. Again, the word's going to get out that you told her what to do, and she said no, and we all saw it. So the problem is, verse 18, this very day the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. Do you see now where the guys are getting nervous, right? It's kind of like if the pastor's wife can treat, but if the king's wife can treat the king that way, then our wives are going to think they can treat us that way. See, this is what's going on here. This is why they're starting to get nervous. You're going to create all kinds of conflict and fights all along the kingdom, all because you can't control your wife. Verse 19, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. And I was thinking, like, one, so the king's drunk. He thinks he's at least been disrespected by his wife. And he's listening to his boys who are afraid of their wives. Like, do you see that? And I really feel like the author is trying to get us there a little bit. Like, do you see what's going on here? Like the foolishness. Because, again, they're worried about their wives finding out what Queen Vashti does. So let's make a law and send it to everybody so that they do know. Like, again, they didn't have social media. Like, how is this even going to get to all? Like, do you see the size of the land? How are they even going to find out unless in your drunkenness you're like, let's make a law and send it out to everybody so they do know how my wife treated me? Like, the whole thing, I think the author's trying to set up, like, this is foolish. But they're worried about not having the women disrespect them. Verse 20, so when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. Like, let's make sure everybody knows about this. That every man may be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. The king thought this was a good idea. This advice he'd just been given. While drunk, he issued a decree which could never be altered. Like, again, that's just not good governmental policy right there. Or any life policy, I guess. There's this family crisis that's now turned into a potential social crisis. And again, I want to think, God providentially, where is he? What's he doing? But remember this stuff, because it's going to get to a point where all of a sudden it's going to start shifting. And we're going to see some of these things where God, behind the scenes, is orchestrating and doing things to accomplish his purpose, one of being saving his people, the Jews. I just want to read one verse in chapter 2, and then we'll wrap it up. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So it says, after these things, and it seems that there's been a 4-year gap between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Because chapter 1, verse 3 says in the 3rd year of his reign, and then in chapter 2, verse 16, it says in the 7th year of his reign. So it seems like the activities of chapter 2 are happening 4 years after 1. And if you even study history, which again, one of the cool things about the Word of God is all of this history, all these kings, all of that can be found in secular history books. Like this stuff happened. Like this Xerxes guy, this Ahasuerus, the Persian Empire, all this stuff has really happened and has been recorded. But during that 4 years, it appears that Ahasuerus has been out to war. And maybe now he's getting back home. And it says his anger has kind of subsided. Basically, he's like, now he's realizing that was a really stupid thing to do when I was drunk. Like to make a law that can't be overturned. And that's key as well for this story. These laws could not be overturned because basically their setup was, I'm the king and I have all authority and I'm all knowing. So if there's a law that would ever need to be overturned, that means I'm not all knowing and I'm not all powerful. So they made a law saying no laws could ever be overturned. Again, the ego is pretty big here. So he's drunk and makes a law that saying his wife is gone and she can never return. He comes back 4 years later, and it sounds like maybe he's kind of wishing the queen was around. So they came up with an idea. You got to come back next week. We'll talk about the idea. Again, all of this setting the stage, I believe, for the providential hand of God. I just want to read, David Kleins wrote this in a book, The Esther Scroll, The Story of the Story. The opening chapter has set the tone that cannot be forgotten, conditioning the reader not to take the king, his princes, or his law at their face value, and alerting the reader to keep his eyes open for ironies that will doubtless be implicit in the story that is yet to unfold. So again, these first 2 chapters, he's unfolding this story that it may seem, where's God? What does this have to do with anything? These guys are just ridiculously dumb, partying and passing laws, and all to teach us something, that even when we're living through life and we're like, where's God? We're going to see he's very much at work and going to accomplish his purposes. I just encourage you, even this week, think back. Think about all the ways that God orchestrated things to get you where we are. Merv's here, and his wife, and he helped build this. And I was even thinking about that this morning. Ran into Daryl, Gator Camp, something, and just God's providence, the way he lines things up sometimes, it's like, I don't know why or how, but he gets things done. Let's stand and pray. Father, we just thank you for loving us. We thank you that you are sovereign, and I pray that that truth would help us rest well, that you do all that you please, and nothing that you don't please. Father, I also thank you for love, which I really believe means that you needed to allow us to have the will to do things, and yet somehow in all of that, it still doesn't hinder your plans. Father, it's good to have a God that's bigger and smarter and beyond me. Help me just to trust that. Help us to trust that. And Father, I just pray as we continue just to read your word and look at this book, Esther, that we would grow in our faith, we would grow in our trust, that even when it appears that you're not around, that you're not active, that things don't make sense, that our faith in you, knowing that you are at work, that you will weave everything together to accomplish your purposes, that would help us, Father, again, to rest in who you are. I thank you for each one here this morning. Again, not a coincidence that anyone is here. Bless them today, Father. Give them rest today. I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.